Robbie wants to know, how many anodes do I need for a 14-foot aluminum tinny? It has pitting starting and I need to clean and stop the problem. Well, Robbie, I appreciate you subscribing and thank you for the question. It's a great topic and there is not, unfortunately, a solid answer that I can give you. You are going to need something like this. This is a corrosion reference electrode. It's from boatzinks.com. You just go there and get this thing because on your boat, the zincs, it is going to depend on what they call hull potential. And so your hull potential is going to be basically, I'm trying to think of the right way to put this, that way everybody could understand it. Because if you just read something like this, it's a silver chloride, reference electrode. And I guess just best way to say it is that between your bonding system and the engine and the battery and, shore power and just all the things that go into, that are electric conduciveness or that can conduce electricity and the way they all work together, there is there's electrical current and everything basically. And so the potential of the hull, you use the anodes in order to level all that out and you get it to a certain level where it's not any electrical current is not eating your hull, which is what you got right now. You've got an aluminum tinny that's got, it doesn't have enough anodes, or it might have too many anodes, or it does not have the right anodes, or you have another problem going on that is allowing electricity to start to corrode your hull, or you have, you've got an engine which is dissimilar metals from the aluminum and your stainless steel propeller, the lower unit, and all this other stuff. And then depending on where you keep it and the water that's around there, is there shore power, something like that? Do you charge the boat? Is there a problem within the boat? There's so many different factors there that are going to affect it. That's why you're going to need something like this. So what I'm going to say is that with this, they say it right here, is you've got different, here's the hulls. So whenever you put this thing in there, your aluminum hull is going the recommended voltage. That's what you're supposed to have. So based on that number, if you have one of these and you take your boat and you put this in the water, that's the reading that you should get. And then based on that reading is you're going to know, do I have too many anodes? Do I not have enough anodes? Or if the number is super high, then you know that you've got a stray current issue and there's something going on where maybe you've got a bad wire with a bilge pump, or maybe, something else could be a problem that's getting electricity and it's getting into the hull and it's just eating your entire hull up. So you really need something like this in order to figure out the amount of anodes that you need to put on your boat, because every boat is going to be different, because every boat has different, the amount of through hulls that are through the hull, anything that's metal. So basically you take a boat and anything that's metal that's sticking through the boat, including the engine and your through hulls and your shutoff valves, the transducers, water pickups, all these things that conduct electricity. That's why you have a bonding system inside the boat. So that way they're all attached on its own grounding circuit. So that way, if there is a problem, it kind of spreads it out over all of those things. And taking any kind of dissimilar metal and then putting it into water, you're creating, an environment where you're going to have galvanic corrosion. And so it's just a problem. You need something like this in order to test it and see the hull potential and whether or not you have the correct hull potential and everything is, evened out. Also, the different types of anodes. There are different types of anodes. You've got zinc, aluminum, magnesium. They each have their own properties and uses based on where you keep the boat and how you use the boat, what's in the boat, for power, what kind of power are you running in there? Do you have a transducer? I mean, you could have a transducer that's leaking and it's just sending electricity into the water and boom, it's eating up your hull. So you kind of need a corrosion reference electrode to figure out how many anodes you need to put on your boat. There's not really any other way to do it other than that. So sorry about that, Robbie. I wish I could give you a like straight up, this is the answer. You need 4 anodes. But like you can't do that without getting the numbers from the corrosion reference. Like that's how the boats set them up. Like that's how they figure all that out, is they use stuff like that in order to figure out the hull potential. And then once the hull potential, then they add anodes to the boats. And this is what the boat manufacturers do. Pretty much all of them, when they build their boats, that's part of the research and development of the boat, is they check, they put the whole boat together, they put it in the water, and they check stuff like that. And then they go through and they fix out, they build the bonding system and the way the electronics are in the boat. Like all that is figured out at the manufacturer level. So by the time you get the boat, like that's already been figured out. And then, obviously people, when they get the boat, they put a bunch of stuff in it. They change the electronics, they change this, they change that. So that's when you can get into having other, corrosion issues, when you start changing a bunch of stuff. And then the manufacturers, like, they set it up to be the way it is. And then when you go and change stuff, that's when you need to have a reference electrode in order to figure out, what exactly did that change do as far as changing the hull potential and, the hull potential for corrosion. Michael Honeycutt says, how often does impeller need to be replaced? Well, depends. Manufacturers, most of them all say 3 years. And then there's a lot of people, like if you're in South Florida, a lot of people do them every 2 years. So it kind of depends. There's more to changing the impeller than just the fact that the impeller can go bad. So like up north, people have not done impellers for 15 years and not had a problem. So down, it all depends. The heat, an impeller is a rubber component. When it heats up, it can get hard. So when it heats up and cools down, that rubber can get hard, which it's going to lose its flex. When it loses its flex, it's going to lose its ability to move the same volume of water to cool the engine. Again, up north, you might not see a problem for a long time, especially on smaller engines. But on bigger engines where you need more cooling water to cool down a bigger power head, you can see problems quicker. If you're in salt water, especially warm salt water like South Florida or anywhere down here, it's not just the fact that like, okay, the impeller physically might last for 5 years and not wear down. But if you don't take your lower unit off for 5 years, when it comes time to take that lower unit off, you're going to have a problem getting it off. And you might end up destroying your lower unit, or having to destroy the lower unit to take it off your engine because it's corroded itself onto the engine, especially certain models. I mean, like a 3.3 Yamaha or some of the other ones, some of those drive shafts are exposed, and you can get, like if it's on a catamaran that has a lot of spray that goes up in there where that drive shaft is, that drive shaft can weld itself basically into the crank. If you run low on oil, same thing. The drive shaft can weld itself into the crank. So removing the lower unit and putting grease on there and then putting it back up and greasing all the stuff, that is also part of the reason why you do the impellers. But I would say every 2 to 3 years, change the impeller. If you're in South Florida, I'd drop that lower unit every 2 years just to drop the lower unit. I mean, but at the same time, if you drop the lower unit, I mean, what's a $20 impeller? You might as well just change it. Adam Chico says, I have a brand new boat. When installing a composite transducer block, a screw broke off into the transom. How should I fix this? Well, Adam, one, you can drill around the screw and get the screw to come out. Once you pull it out, you're going to have to make epoxy, mix it up, and then fill that hole with epoxy. So that way it's full. Composite transom, you're going to have it's not like you're going to have a rotting problem, but delamination, stuff like that could be a problem. But drill it out and then fill it with epoxy, and then boom, that's going to fix it. Or you could leave it. That's just it. So a lot of times, if that's broken, you could just leave it. The screw, hopefully you put some sealant on there when you ran that in there. But my guess is that the hole that was drilled for the screw was too small. And when you screwed it in, the actual bolt itself was just so tight in that hole that it just snapped the bolt. Or the screw, obviously. That's usually what happens. So one, you could leave it and you probably never ever see a problem with it. The one problem that you're probably going to see eventually would be a little bit of delamination with the gel coat around that screw, but most likely that screw is going to be behind the bracket that's holding your transducer onto the transom. So if you fill that full of sealant and then screw that bracket on there, that screw is going to be broken off inside the transom, but yet the screw is also going to be surrounded with sealant with a bracket over the top of it, so it's kind of sealed. So you could leave it or you could drill it out and fill the hole with epoxy. And then either way, if you drill it out and fill it with epoxy, you're going to be able to see it. But again, this is on a transducer below the water line and the bracket's going to be over it, so you'll never see it. So those are basically your two options: leave it or drill it and fill it. Jack says, in the control box, which cable goes to the throttle and which goes to the shifting gears? It depends on your control box. It depends on your engine. Generally, there's a bunch of different control boxes out there, so I can't really tell you, Jack. I don't know what engine you have and I don't know what control box you have, but one of them, it's really easy to tell. When you open it up, just move the handle, boom, you're shifting it into gear. One of those levers is going to move and the other one isn't. Whichever lever moves, that's for the shift cable, and then the other one is going to be for your throttle cable. But the bigger question is, depending on the engine and how that is it a push to pull or is it a pull to push? Meaning the throttle cable, do you pull the cable to move the throttle plate or do you push the throttle cable to move the throttle plate? That's what you're going to need to do. And that's also very, very easy to figure out. Is you look at your engine, you pull the cowling off and you look at your throttle. Does it need to be pulled in order to open the throttle plates, or does it need to be pushed in order to open the throttle plates? And then if it's push or pull, you can go to your control box, and when you put it into gear, boom, it'll shift. And when that shifts, now you know what's in gear. Now move the cable, and one of that, that inside that control box, it's going to go like this. So one's going to pull, the other one's going to push. Based on the engine, if you need to pull or push, that's which one you're going to put it on in order to be a push or pull for the throttle cable. But that's pretty much it. Dwayne Roberts says, what's a good filler for the lower? It has some corrosion, but not a lot. There's bound to be some pitting and sanding. You can use a lot of different stuff, Dwayne. You can use an epoxy with a fairing filler. You can use Total Boat Fair, that Total Fair. You can use a fiberglass Bondo. Any of those are going to be fine because it's just a filler and they will all, stick to aluminum. But on a lower unit, you're going to have to make sure that you prime it and prep it really good. So you're going to want to prime it with a zinc chromate because you've now got that fairing filler on there, especially if you use the Bondo. Even though that Bondo fiberglass, technically, I think that one should be fine. And the Total Fair, same thing, because it's under the water line. Epoxy and a fairing filler is going to probably be the most resilient, but any of those are going to be fine to fair it and fill those holes. And then you're going to prime it, say 3 coats with a zinc chromate primer, and then you're going to put another primer on top of that with 2 to 3 coats, and then you're going to paint it 2 to 3 coats, and then you're going to put a clear coat on top of that. So you're going to have like 9, 10, 12 layers of paint on top of it. So you really shouldn't, I don't think you're gonna have a problem with any of those fairing fillers. NTJ says, I have a 2011 40 horsepower 4-stroke. The Quicksilver replacement thermostat I found online says 120 degrees. Is that too cold? I thought it would get hotter than that. I don't know. I'm not 100% on a 2011 40 horsepower 4-stroke, what the thermostat should be. 120 degrees definitely sounds a little low to me. Like most outboards are in the 140 to 150, 160 degree range. And depending on where you run the engine, or if you're running in really cold water, then you definitely don't want a 120 degree thermostat because your engine's never going to get above 120 degrees. Like when you think about it. So also, I don't deal a lot with cold water. So, my experience is going to be theoretical. Don't take everything that I say as gospel. I'm going to try and give you a couple things that I would think about whenever I do it. But obviously, I don't I don't deal with cold water all the time. And then 90% of the people out there are not going to be dealing with, freezing water temperatures and the adverse effects of that. But when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking, okay, so for one, if the engine's running too cold, then you risk, building carbon, condensation, those kinds of problems. If you're just idling the engine, so if you're just idling the engine, the thermostat should close, which should get it to whatever temperature that may be. 120 degrees seems pretty cold to me. And if you get to 125, the thermostat's going to open up and it's going to move more water, which is going to cool it quicker. And especially when you've got super cold water. When you're running, say, wide open throttle, think about the temperature inside of an engine. And inside the combustion chamber, in order to burn carbon or do any of this, this for a full combustion, burning carbon, cleaning the engine, and getting it hot, when you're running at idle, say 700 RPM, you're lighting that combustion chamber on fire 700 times in a minute, basically. And then if you're running wide open throttle, say 6,000 RPM, you're lighting that combustion chamber on fire 6,000 times per minute. So at wide open throttle, you're going to be creating a lot more heat, and it's going to be able to clean that cylinder out a lot better, even though that thermostat, your thermostat's going to open up. Like if you're creating that much heat, it's going to open up and it's going to allow more water volume in, which is going to cool it down a lot quicker because it's cold water. But at the same time, if it gets below 120 degrees or whatever the thermostat is, the thermostat's going to close regardless of the temperature inside the combustion chamber. It's going to be a lot hotter and a lot better for burning off carbon, stuff like that at wide open throttle than it is at idle, because again, it's just, think about it. You're 700 times versus 6,000 times, but 120 seems a little low. Like a Verado, most of those are 143 where the thermostat opens up. A lot of other ones are anywhere from 140 to 160 is generally where an outboard thermostat is set to. If you're running in really cold water temperatures, you might need to run a different thermostat in order to get the engine temperature to be where it should be. But 120 does sound low to me. So, but I don't know. I would have to look it up in the service manual to figure that out. Nagel Wolf says, hey, I commented about my sunken 26-foot Panga a bit ago. I do remember that. You were wanting to put the jack plate or now I can't think of it. The, whatever that other one is. I ended up going with an Atlas jack plate due to weight. The project is going great. I added the 10-foot power pole and a brand new 140 Suzuki with digital controls, gas tank cleaned, every wire replaced. Boat's been out close to a dozen times, smoothed and dry running. One thing I noticed is that the boat is super tippy. Does better with 4 people, but with 2 can be a pain. Rides amazing on plane. Can we talk about the Panga design being tippy and also weight / center of gravity in boats? I believe the deck is high and need to mount the battery lower in the hull might help. So yeah, that has to do with the beam. Pangas, obviously they're long, they're narrow, they got a big bow that's flared out. Anything that has a really small beam is going to get tippy, and even worse when you get a bigger dead rise. So your dead rise is, the V of the boat, and the sharper it gets, the tippier the boat's going to be. And especially when, the more dead rise that you get like this, it's going to be sharper, so it's going to be tippy. But if you've got a really wide beam, it's not going to be as tippy. If you've got a really small beam, then it's going to be super tippy. And especially, so it's going to be super tippy, and the more weight you put up top, the more tippy it's going to get. So if your deck's high off the water line, then it's going to be even more tippier. That's why when you put 4 people in the boat, that higher deck and that super tippiness, whenever you push that down in the water, it's going to be a little bit more stable because it's, you're pushed down in the water, and the water is going to be higher on the sides of the boat, which makes it less tippy. But anything that's got a small beam, like if you got a narrow beam being, anything below 8 feet is going to be considered a narrow beam, I guess you would say, depending on the length, obviously. But the longer the boat is, and the skinnier it is, the tippier it's going to get. Yeah, if you could get some batteries in there or even add the weight, you might even, I wonder if you've got, what's your live well situation, and do you have a freshwater tank, and how much is your fuel tank? So you can add weight by doing stuff like that, which helps the ride. Obviously, the more weight is going to require you to burn more fuel to go the same speed that you want to go. Like, as you add weight, you go slower, or you need to go higher RPM to get the same speed that you were getting, where you like to run the boat based on that. But the actual weight of the boat, like if you're running with two people, like you said, the boat's going to be sitting higher in the water, and it's going to be tippier because that deck is higher and you've got a narrow beam. But if you got a live well and a freshwater tank and a fuel tank, if you can run with a full tank of fuel, and you can fill up your live well, and you could fill up your freshwater tank and mount your batteries, in the center, all that stuff is going to, add that weight. So like if you're running the boat by yourself or with one other person, if you can add that weight, but then at the same time, when you got four people, if you can, take some of that weight out of the boat, being regulated, you're basically using your live well and your freshwater tank and your fuel tank as a way to ballast the engine or ballast the boat. Being, with four people, you run half a tank depending on where you're going. If you don't need a full tank of fuel, if you can run half a tank of fuel, then, you're going to be regulating the weight on the boat using those three items. So that's awesome to hear about the Panga. I like Pangas. I don't know what a 26-foot Panga's beam is, but yeah, they're narrow, they're long. I mean, and I think they have I don't know the dead rise of a Panga. I can't say whether or not I do. And Hank says Mercury 50 horsepower marine engine fuel is not coming to the spark plugs. I am thinking injectors are solid, ECU is solid. When you add a few drops of gasoline into the cylinders, the engine starts and then stops. Cylinder pressure is very good. When you press the starter to start the engine, oily gasoline comes out the exhaust. Can you help me? Also, there are syringes inside the log. I don't understand. I have no idea what you're saying here. Syringes inside the log. I don't know what that means. Oily gasoline comes out the exhaust. It's probably a two-stroke. But you've got injectors on it. Whenever you put gasoline inside the cylinders, it starts and runs. You've got a fuel delivery problem, obviously, because if you put fuel to it, then it's going there. But I don't know. So you got a 50 horsepower engine with oily gasoline coming out the exhaust, which means it's probably not sparking. But then at the same time, if you're saying that you put fuel inside of the intake and then the engine starts and runs, if you put it, doesn't matter anything. Okay, start there. You've got the intake and you add fuel to the intake and the engine starts and runs. You have a fuel delivery problem to begin with. So whatever that may be, I mean, you think your injectors are good. You think that, what'd you say? You think that the injectors are solid and the ECU is solid, but yet you're adding fuel to the intake and it's starting. One of those isn't either the fuel pump or whatever, something, maybe you don't have the right fuel pressure, something fuel delivery side, you don't have the volume of fuel, something is a problem there, because if you add fuel to the intake and the engine starts and runs, you have a fuel delivery problem. I would start there. Other than that, I'm not sure how else. Greetings from Turkey. Okay, there's a language barrier here. I don't really know what you're saying with the syringes inside the log. The oily gasoline coming out the bottom is probably that something's not firing right, but you definitely have a fuel delivery problem. America coming together. What about that corroded steering arm? I'm looking at a Merc 94 cylinder that is corroded like an old railroad spike. Big project to change it. I'm sure. How safe are these things if rusted heavily? If it's rusted heavily, then obviously it's a problem. But you can run it till it breaks. So, when it breaks, it's going to be a problem. But this steering arm probably is, it's going to be a pain to change that, because that's usually, I don't know about a 94 cylinder, like a 90 Mercury, but on most of them, you got to take the engine off, and that steering arm is like part of the swivel bracket and the bracket assembly. So it's definitely a pain to change them, especially if that's corroded. Think about all the other parts that are going to be corroded along with that. So if you're doing it yourself, you're probably, it's going to be fine, because as far as cost wise, it's going to be a pain. It's going to take you a long time to do it, but it's not going to cost you it shouldn't cost you that much. If you got to pay someone to do it, it's going to take them a long time and it's going to probably be expensive, probably not worth doing it. But the steering arm depends on the corrosion, how bad it is. You might hit it a little bit and see it, see how strong it looks. But if it looks like it's about to break, then it's going to break. So usually if you hit on it, and surface rust and actual rust, look what, if you hit it and chip off that rust, it might just be surface rust, but I don't know, without looking at it, I can't really tell you. Garbage Man, hey brother, does the starter needs to be hooked up to the trim to go up and down? Does the starter need to be hooked up for the trim to go up and down? Generally no, but on some engines, the power going to the engine, the power will go to the starter, and then from the starter it will go to a distribution block that then feeds all your relays, like your trim tilt relays, start relays, that kind of thing. So depending on the model engine that you have, some of them you would need power to that for the trim to go up and down, but other ones, no, you don't need power to the starter for the engine to go up and down, depending on the model. So if your engine model has the power going to the starter, and then from the starter goes over to a distribution block that feeds those trim relays, then yes, you will need power to your starter for the engine to go up and down. Otherwise, if not, then no, you don't. The power to the engine, power needs to go to the engine no matter what. And then that power to the engine, usually the engine where the power hooks up will definitely feed power to your trim relays. So that'll allow you to trim the engine up and down. Low Tide says, I wish you were close to where I live, Miami Beach, so that you will be my boat mechanic. I have a 2021 Cobia 320. I've noticed some vibrations at low RPM, 2000. Any suggestions? I look at your propeller first. Did you hit something? Because if you hit something and you've got a ding in your prop and you've got vibrations, then that would probably be the first thing I look at, because at a 2021 320 Cobia, vibrations. Now, are you saying vibrations on the engine? Are you saying vibrations at the boat? Like what are you saying? Where is the vibration at? Because other than that, yeah, I would check your propellers first. And then other than that, look at the propeller first. Greg, so why did the base gasket need to be replaced? The base gasket on that 90, we had to replace it because we pulled the power head. Anytime you pull a power head, you need to change the base gasket. So base gaskets don't generally go bad, but anytime you pull a power head, you need to change the base gasket just because it's basically a one-time use thing. Edo says, just curious why we don't just disconnect the main fuel line and hook up fuel injection cleaner to the engine side and let the low and high fuel pumps do their job. Same as you just did, but not going to be a lot quicker and less chance of ruining your injector seals and possibly damaging injectors by prying them off. Talking about trying to clean injectors, and generally the reason that you can't do that is because the fuel pump doesn't make the same amount of pressure. Usually on a fuel injector cleaner or, cleaning them on the bench, something like that, you can get a lot more pressure to clean them out and let them soak. So you can soak them in a solution as well as put pressure behind them. So if you put them on an injector cleaning, thing, it has a lot more pressure. Your high pressure pump is only going to be making like 45 PSI, which generally isn't enough pressure even with cleaner in order to clean them out. You kind of need a little bit more pressure, whether that air pressure or the pressure on the injection cleaning machine, to help in cleaning those injectors out. Dwayne Roberts says, oh wow, I thought you could flush the motor using muffs connected to a flush bottle connected to the hose. It kind of makes sense that it wouldn't work as well as reversing the flow. It would be a lot harder to get larger pieces of rust or corrosion, even salt, out of the tiny pee hole. Geez, can you have a flush system put into an old two-stroke? Yeah, you can put a flush system onto an old two-stroke, depending on how big it is. On some of them, you can just put it right there on the water jacket. And then also, when you're trying to flush something out, generally you want to take the lower unit off of it because, as you're cleaning all that stuff out, it's going to come out the exhaust and you want it to be able to come out. If it's, you're trying to just do it on the flush attachment, all that's going to be going down in your lower unit and it's, it's not going to work as well. You can flush an engine. Like if you're just talking about flushing the engine, then, you can just run it on the hose. But as far as cleaning it out, trying to clean out your cooling passages using a cleaner, generally you need to go directly to the water tube one for the volume of cleaner, and then two, so everything can come out of the engine. And we'll do one more from Rob. He says, what should someone expect to pay for a 90 horsepower two-stroke outboard motor? As far as, right now, in 2024, depending on the engine, I would say like, a couple grand. I wouldn't go spending $6,000-$7,000 on a used two-stroke engine. I would say a couple grand should be pretty good, but above that, I would say $2,000 to $4,000, somewhere in there. If someone's asking $5,000 for a used outboard, it better be in really good condition. But anything above that, also it's going to depend on the the horsepower. How big is the engine? And at 90, yeah, I would say 2, 3, $4 grand tops for a 90 horsepower two-stroke outboard.